What would be the most difficult choice a parent could ever make? After preschool, my 5-year-old daughter Emily sobbed and said, "Daddy, I don't want to go to school anymore. They keep punching my belly." I saw genuine fear in her eyes and instantly knelt down. I gently asked Emily to explain what was going on at school, while my wife, Sarah, hurried over to her, who was holding her belly. She claimed that someone kept hitting her stomach while she was napping. It made her feel ill and occurred nearly daily. She was unable to respond when I asked who was doing it because it was dark in the room during nap time. I had a meeting with Mrs. Carter, the preschool director, the following morning. She vowed to look into it right away and appeared truly shocked. During nap time, a teacher would be positioned directly beside Emily to go over all of their protocols. However, Emily continued to complain of stomach pain when she got home that afternoon. Dr. Miller examined her thoroughly after we brought her to see him. There were no visible signs of physical trauma or bruises. The results of her blood work were satisfactory, and her abdomen felt normal. He recommended some mild medication and speculated that it might be anxiety or even acid reflux. However, I was certain that my daughter wasn't lying. The preschool insisted that Emily was not touched during the following 2 weeks. She kept returning home with the same tale, despite their constant observation and the fact that they had moved her mat next to the teacher's desk. Trying to figure out what was going on with our little girl had Sarah and I at our wits' end. Sarah recommended that Emily's room be equipped with a baby monitor. Perhaps she was experiencing sleep disturbances or night terrors, which she mistakenly associated with her school experiences. We needed answers, so I agreed. Neither of the children knew that we had set up the camera. Nothing was out of the ordinary during the first few nights. When the children were playing upstairs during the day, I also began to leave the monitor on. At that point, I started to notice strange behavior from Noah, our 8-year-old son. When Emily was playing, Noah would often enter her room. At times, he would observe her from the doorway. At other times, she would push him away when he got too close. I found his expression bothersome, even though it seemed like typical sibling behavior. I was looking over the footage from the night before, 5 days after I had installed the monitor. Noah had gone into Emily's room at about 2 in the morning. After standing next to her bed, he reached down and gave her a forceful punch to the stomach. Emily whimpered and curled up in her sleep, but she didn't wake up completely. Before he left, Noah struck her twice more. As I called Sarah over, I felt nauseous. I showed her several examples of Noah hitting Emily over the previous week, and we both watched in disbelief. Sometimes during afternoon naps, when we believed both children were asleep, and other times at night. For weeks, our son had been harming his sister in a methodical manner. That morning, we confronted Noah. Until we showed him the video, he denied it. He simply shrugged and said that he had no idea why he had done it. No apology, no justification. As I tried to figure out how we'd missed this, Sarah broke down in tears. Noah had always been a decent child with friends and good grades. We scheduled a meeting with child psychologist Dr. Collins right away. That week, she had multiple meetings with Noah. Although he was helpful, he was unable to justify his actions. He admitted that there were moments when he felt compelled to harm Emily. He would be unable to resist the urge when it struck. In addition to possibly prescribing medication, Dr. Collins advised keeping the siblings apart. She wanted to use brain scans to rule out any neurological problems. We installed door alarms and rigorous supervision. Although Noah appeared to realize his mistake, we managed to catch him attempting to enter Danielia's room twice more. I was obsessively watching the monitor footage during this trying time, searching for patterns. At that point, I became aware of a strange phenomenon in recordings made a few weeks prior. Some of the footage from Noah's room during the day featured our cat, Pepper. When she vanished 2 months ago, we thought she had fled. At first, I saw Noah playing with Pepper in a typical way, but in early March, I noticed that he was picking her up roughly. He was tugging her tail as she attempted to flee in another clip. Noah was seen carrying Pepper into his closet in the final video. After that, she never again made an appearance on camera. I went up to Noah's room with trembling hands. Sarah had taken Emily to a play date while he was at school. I began moving boxes and toys after opening his closet. I discovered a tiny, tape-sealed cardboard box behind his sporting goods. Even before I opened it, I could smell it. Pepper's collar and the towel-wrapped remnants of her body were inside. Based on her condition, she had been dead for weeks. I felt like throwing up as I staggered back. We were unaware that our 8-year-old son had killed our family cat and concealed her in his closet. I informed Sarah to keep Emily away from the house over the phone right away. I then informed Dr. Collins of this discovery over the phone. "Call the police and don't touch anything else," she advised. This went beyond typical behavioral problems in children. Noah had a history of purposeful animal abuse that frequently spread to people. I was waiting with 2 police officers and a social worker when Noah got home from school. His face went blank the moment he saw them. No astonishment, no terror, just nothing. He cocked his head and stared at me as they described their purpose. "Did you find the other box, too?" My eyes widened. While Ms. Alvarez took out her phone and began making calls, Detective Harris moved forward right away and placed his hand on Noah's shoulder. After telling Noah to remain exactly where he was, the detective turned to face the other officer, who nodded and went straight upstairs. My 8-year-old had just mentioned another box, and I stood there dumbfounded, trying to process what she had just said. With that same vacant expression on his face, Noah sat down on the couch and began to swing his feet back and forth as he observed each of us moving around him. When the detective asked him where the other box was, Noah simply tipped his head and said, "I forgot," as if he were referring to a toy that had gone missing. After she hung up, Ms. Alvarez informed me that Noah's room should be treated as a possible crime scene and that no one should enter until the search was complete. Noah picked at a loose thread on the couch cushion as I watched the officers put on gloves and go upstairs, all of them acting as though this was just another typical afternoon. They began methodically going through his room, opening drawers, looking under furniture, and packing things. Up there, I could hear them rearranging things as Noah hummed softly to himself on the couch. He gave brief, flat responses when Ms. Alvarez, who was sitting next to him with a notepad, began questioning him about friends at school. The detective called down after 20 minutes or so, telling me to stay in the doorway and come upstairs. They had completely destroyed Noah's room, and everything was on the floor when I arrived. They had discovered a shoebox beneath his bed, wrapped in one of Emily's old pillowcases, which made my stomach turn. About a dozen of Emily's hair ties, which we believe she had misplaced, were found inside. A piece of notebook paper with Noah's sloppy handwriting on it, and several of her drawings that had disappeared from the refrigerator. I saw that it was a set of guidelines for hitting Emily when the detective held it up for me to read. For example, wait 2 days between only 3 times and not when mom is home. As I became aware that my son had been plotting and monitoring his attacks on his younger sister like a sick experiment, my legs began to weaken. After checking what they had discovered upstairs, Ms. Alvarez immediately returned to her phone conversation with her supervisor. She informed them of the evidence and advised them to immediately put an emergency safety plan into place because Noah was a direct threat to his sister. Looking out the window, I saw Sarah pulling into the driveway with Emily in the back seat as I heard car doors outside. Before they could enter, I hurried downstairs and out the front door to greet them. Excited to tell me about her play date, Emily jumped out of the car, but as soon as she saw my face, she broke down in tears. Sarah questioned why there were police cars in our driveway and what was wrong. While I spoke with my mother, I instructed Emily to spend a minute playing on her swing set. I whispered to Sarah about what they had discovered in Noah's room after she had left my ears. Emily's belongings and the rules he had drafted were in the box. She grabbed my arm with such force that it hurt, and her face turned white. As I explained that the police were searching his room, she repeatedly shook her head and said no. As Emily played on the swings, utterly oblivious to what was going on, Ms. Alvarez came outside with a folder full of papers and approached us. She clarified that they had to take Noah out of the house right away for Danielia's safety in light of what they had discovered in his actions. She said they would seek an emergency involuntary hold through the courts, or we could agree to voluntary placement for psychiatric evaluation. Ms. Alvarez shook her head when Sarah began to cry and asked if we could just watch him get closer or get more locks. Noah required prompt, secure professional intervention, she said, citing evidence of planned, systematic abuse. Noah was still seated on the couch, playing with a toy car he had discovered between the cushions, when I peered through the living room window. I felt as though I was signing away my son with each signature I made on the documents Ms. Alvarez placed in front of me, and my hands trembled. Sarah also signed, shedding tears as she wrote her name on the paper. In order to transport Noah to the county hospital's children's psychiatric unit, Ms. Alvarez summoned the transport team and promised that they would arrive within an hour. Noah was still on the couch, rolling the toy car back and forth on his leg when we returned inside. He simply inquired as to whether there was a television in the hospital when we informed him that he would be spending some time there. Two scrubs stepped out of the van carrying the transport team, which had the hospital's logo on the side. Noah was treated with kindness as they discussed the hospital and the conditions of his room. As they watched, he carefully and slowly packed a small bag with toys and clothes, acting as though nothing urgent needed to be done. When it was time to leave, Noah picked up his bag and made his way without incident to the van. He didn't seem upset about leaving, nor did he cry or beg to stay. With the same flat tone he'd used when discussing Pepper, he turned back to me as they helped him into the van and said he'd be fine now. After the van left, I watched from the driveway until it rounded a corner and vanished. Emily kept asking where Noah was and why we couldn't go home during that night at the hotel. She didn't understand why we had to stay somewhere else and wanted her stuffed animals back in her room. Despite knowing that Noah was at the hospital, Sarah and I alternated between staying up. Every little sound in the hallway made us both jump. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something terrible was going to happen, so I kept checking the door locks and staring out the window at the parking lot. Sarah and I lay there looking at the ceiling, wondering how we'd missed all the signs and what would happen to our family now, while Emily finally fell asleep between us in the large hotel bed. While Emily was eating cereal in the hotel's breakfast area, the following morning, my phone rang. Since 6 a.m., Dr. Collins said she had been on calls with the hospital staff, sharing all of Noah's sessions with them. Her description of conduct disorder with callous, unemotional traits was a perfect fit for Noah's behavior patterns. To create a comprehensive profile, the hospital psychiatrist requested all of her notes and video recordings from their consultations. While Sarah fed Daniel Leo waffle pieces and attempted to act normal, I jotted down everything she said on the hotel notepad. Detective Harris knocked on our hotel room door at around 10 o'clock with a recording device and a thick folder. He asked us to list all the things we had observed about Noah during the previous 12 months while seated at the little table. We talked about the dead birds in the yard for 3 hours, which Sarah had attributed to cats. When Emily cried, Noah would look at her as if observing her response. At a birthday party, he broke his friend's toy and pretended to be perplexed when the child became agitated. Harris jotted down pages of notes and repeatedly requested additional information regarding times, dates, and particular behaviors. His pen stopped working, and he simply stared at us when we reached the section about locating Pepper's body. He stated that they were examining the possibility of filing criminal charges, but that it was essentially unprecedented in our state to prosecute a 7-year-old. We had only packed for one night, so we had to return to the house the following day to get more clothes. It felt strange to walk through the front door, as if you were entering a deceased person's house. Sarah stayed downstairs with Emily, who was afraid to return, while I went upstairs to pack. Despite having visited Emily's room hundreds of times, I noticed things there that I had never noticed before. Noah could see deep scratches on her doorframe at his height, as if he had been attempting to enter when it was locked. 3 of her stuffed animals had minor tears that appeared intentional and not the result of normal wear. Her toy box had been snapped into pieces, and a broken crayon was concealed behind it. I packed Emily's belongings into 2 suitcases after taking pictures of everything for the detective. We were driving back to the hotel that afternoon when the psychiatric unit called. Noah, according to the doctor, was abiding by all of their regulations and hadn't caused any issues with other patients or staff. However, he displayed no emotional reaction to being separated from his family, which worried her. Most children his age would be constantly asking about their parents or crying for them. Noah only wanted to know if there were video games in the rec room and what time meals were served. Even in children with serious behavioral problems, she said this type of detachment was highly unusual. When Emily eventually dozed off that night, Sarah lost it in the hotel restroom. She kept alternating between being afraid of what Noah might do if he came home and crying that he was only a young boy in need of assistance. She repeatedly questioned me about our mistakes and how we could have produced a person who could have killed our cat and injured his sister. I held her as she sobbed, but I had been asking myself the same questions, so I had no answers. She continued, maybe we were too strict, or maybe not strict enough, or maybe we should have noticed sooner. Despite Dr. Collins' constant insistence that we weren't to blame, the guilt was eating us both alive. Mrs. Carter called 2 days later to see how our family was doing and to inquire about Emily's health. According to her, the entire preschool staff was considering us and wanted to assist in any way they could. When Emily was ready to return, they would have additional counselors available and accommodate our schedule. In retrospect, she added, there had been a couple of incidents involving Noah during his 2 years at their summer camp. There was nothing significant enough to record, but there was a pattern of him not realizing when he had offended other children. At the time, it had seemed like typical kid stuff, but she wished she had spoken up sooner. Dr. Bennett, who specialized in treating children with severe behavioral issues, was scheduled to meet with us by Dr. Collins. 40 minutes from the hotel, his office was located in a medical building with walls covered in degrees and certifications I had never heard of. He went over everything we had recorded about Noah for 2 hours, including the police reports and the baby monitor videos. He stated, we were dealing with something way beyond typical childhood aggression or even standard conduct disorder. Noah's systematic mistreatment of Emily and his utter lack of regret pointed to something far more sinister. According to him, some kids are born with neurological abnormalities that impact how their brains handle impulse control and empathy. These kids would never truly feel bad about hurting other people the way that regular people do, but they could learn to follow the rules through consequences. Noah exhibited a level of planning that was highly concerning for someone so young, as evidenced by his calculated actions and his ability to conceal them for such a long time. We saw Noah at the hospital for the first time under supervision 3 days later. There were books and toys in the visit room, but there were also cameras everywhere and a staff member present the entire time. Noah asked when he could go home as soon as he entered the room in his hospital pajamas, as if he were inquiring about the weather. He simply nodded and asked if I had brought his Nintendo Switch when I explained that he needed to recover first and that the doctors were teaching him how to be safe. He didn't seem to notice that his mother had been crying, nor did he inquire about Emily or Sarah. He kept asking about video games and when he would be able to wear his normal clothes again, despite the therapist's attempts to get him to talk about his feelings. In order to rule out any tumors or lesions that might account for Noah's behavior, the neurologist wanted to perform brain scans after the visit. Noah underwent MRIs, EEGs, and other tests I couldn't pronounce during our 6-hour stay at the hospital. The technician noted that he was unusual for a child of his age because he lay motionless in the machines without complaining. Noah obeyed commands like a little robot, whereas most 7-year-olds required sedation or at least continual reassurance. Throughout the entire process, I hoped they would discover a problem that could be resolved with medicine or surgery. However, I knew in my heart that we wouldn't receive such a straightforward response. Dr. Dorsey called us in to go over the results together after they were returned 2 days later. Each scan revealed a healthy 8-year-old brain free of lesions, tumors, or anything else that might account for Noah's actions. As he pointed to various regions of the pictures on his computer screen, Dr. Bennett explained that children like Noah differed not in appearance, but in the way their brains functioned. Despite appearing normal on scans, the areas responsible for impulse control and empathy functioned differently. According to him, this was common for kids with these kinds of behavioral problems, which meant that we were dealing with a problem that was beyond the scope of simple medication or surgery. Emily woke up 3 times that night, screaming. She was drenched from wetting the bed once more when I went to console her. It had been more than a year since she had an accident, but ever since Noah was brought to the hospital, it had been occurring every night. She began hiding behind furniture when someone came to the door during the day, and she would flinch if Sarah or I moved too quickly close to her. Once eager to run up and give a hug to everyone, my little girl was now afraid of her own shadow. After noticing Emily's difficulties, Ms. Alvarez called around to locate a specialist in trauma processing for young children. She arranged for us to see Laura Green, a specialist in working with young abuse victims. The first session took place at Laura's office, which was filled with toys and dolls, and appeared more like a playroom than a therapy setting. Laura sat on the floor close by, not pressuring Emily to speak, but simply being there and keeping her safe as she played with the dollhouse for the entire hour. In the meantime, the insurance company began to make it difficult for Noah to remain in the mental health facility. They sent a letter stating that he did not meet their requirements for ongoing inpatient coverage because he was stable and abiding by the rules in the controlled setting. Noah was only safe because of the locked unit and ongoing supervision, according to letters from 3 different doctors that Ms. Alvarez had to obtain and file emergency paperwork. She argued for hours on the phone with insurance agents who had never met Noah but believed they were more knowledgeable than his physicians. That afternoon, Detective Harris gave us an update on their investigation into Noah's room over the phone. Beneath his mattress, they had discovered a notebook containing sketches of distressed stick figures and injured animals. Additionally, a list of the students in his class was included with 5 names marked with check marks. Harris simply replied that they were still looking into the checks when I asked what they meant, but that we might want to let the parents of those families know. Erica Moore from Pine Ridge Residential Treatment Center called us 2 days later. She was straightforward right away, outlining how their program dealt with kids who had serious behavioral issues, including those who lacked empathy. She claimed that although they could use rigorous structure and consequences to teach Noah to control his impulses and adhere to social norms, they couldn't force him to experience emotions that he wasn't able to. Children usually stayed for 6 months to 2 years, depending on their progress, at the facility, which was 2 hours away. Sarah eventually broke down and acknowledged that she had been observing odd things about Noah for more than a year during our weekly family therapy session. Despite the fact that she had repeatedly discovered dead birds in our backyard, she persuaded herself that the neighbor's cat was the source of them. At the playground, she had noticed Noah observing other children with a peculiar look, as if he were studying them rather than having fun. She believed that all boys went through that stage, even though she had seen him removing legs from insects in the garage. She learned from Dr. Collins that she hadn't caused this by ignoring the warning signs, and that many parents didn't notice them because they didn't think their child could do such things. I pulled a pillow and blanket into the hallway between the children's rooms that evening. I felt compelled to protect Emily's door, even though Noah was locked in a hospital unit 30 miles away. At every sound, I jumped up to see how she was doing. I would check to make sure she was still there, breathing, and safe. Even though I was exhausted, I couldn't stop checking and checking again. At 3 in the morning, Sarah discovered me there and attempted to persuade me to return to our bed, but I was unable to leave my post. Noah had always been such a courteous student, so his 2nd grade teacher said in an email that she was shocked to hear the news. Looking back, she said she did observe that he appeared to pay close attention to the other kids' emotional responses, almost as if he was making notes about how to react. Noah would pat children's backs when they cried on the playground, but his expression remained expressionless. Noah would laugh along with everyone else when they did something amusing, but it would be too late, as if he were imitating them. She claimed that she had never anticipated anything this serious, and had assumed he was simply shy or perhaps autistic. 3 days later, Sarah and I went to our first parent support group for kids with serious behavioral issues. About a dozen other parents were seated in a circle of folding chairs at the meeting, which took place in a church basement. Everyone appeared just as worn out and defeated as we did. One mother described her 11-year-old daughter, who attempted to poison her younger brother and spent 3 years in residential treatment. A father described how his son appeared to be flawless until they discovered him torturing the neighborhood cats when he was 8 years old. Another couple reported that their child's lack of empathy did not significantly improve after years of therapy and medication trials. I felt less alone after hearing their stories, but it also validated what Dr. Bennett had been attempting to convey. This was not something that would simply disappear with the correct care. For years, these families had been coping with this, and they would be doing so for the rest of their lives. Although their children had learned to obey in order to stay out of trouble, they had never truly grown to love anyone. The leader of the support group discussed grief and how we needed to learn to parent the child we actually had while grieving for the child we believed we had. The following morning, Noah was put on medication by the hospital psychiatrist. Although she cautioned us not to expect miracles, she called to explain that it would help control his impulses. Although the medications could lessen the desire to harm people, they were unable to foster empathy. As the nurse observed, Noah swallowed each dose without protest. We had our first supervised visit since his admission 2 days later. A therapist watched from the corner of the small room where Noah sat opposite us. Something in his eyes seemed even more vacant than before, but he still had the same appearance. Like he was reading from a script, he rattled off his daily schedule when I asked how he was doing. Group therapy at 9 o'clock, breakfast at 7 o'clock, lunch at noon, additional therapy, dinner, and bedtime. He remained rigid in Sarah's arms despite her attempts to embrace him. Noah went on to say that he had been considering Pepper. He expressed regret for her departure. Before I asked him if he understood why what he did was wrong, my heart leaped for a moment. Reciting exactly what the therapist must have told him, he cocked his head. It is illegal and depressing to injure animals. Words were memorized, with no true comprehension. I felt nauseous, but the therapist nodded as if this was progress. In the meantime, Emily had begun attending trauma therapy twice a week with Laura. She used crayons to draw our family during one session. I was a stick figure holding Sarah's hand. Noah was a black scribble, with thick red lines separating him from the rest of us, while Emily stood between us, grinning broadly. Later, Laura showed us the photo and informed us that it was, in fact, healthy. Knowing that being apart from Noah kept her safe, Emily was processing the separation as protective. Even as she dealt with what had happened, she was learning to feel safe once more. 3 weeks flew by, filled with paperwork, hospital visits, and therapy sessions. Then came the hearing date for Noah's long-term placement. Despite sitting next to each other in the courtroom, Sarah and I felt very far apart. As I gazed at the wood grain on the judge's bench, she continued to twist her wedding ring. The prosecutor began by enumerating all of the incidents we had reported and characterizing Noah as a danger to others. Though they were all true, each word felt like a knife. Our attorney merely requested the best course of action, without contesting the facts. Next to testify was Dr. Bennett. He gave a clinical explanation of Noah's diagnosis, outlining the neurological variations that impacted his capacity for empathy. He suggested intensive behavioral therapy combined with long-term residential treatment. In response to a direct question, he said that Emily would continue to be at serious risk of harm if placed at home. He spoke clearly but cautiously. Noah and his sister couldn't live together in safety. Through a video link from the hospital, the judge requested to speak with Noah directly. Noah sat motionless on the screen, dressed in a hospital shirt. The judge posed straightforward queries. Was he aware of his purpose for being there? Since I disregarded the regulations. Was he aware that he had harmed his sister? Indeed. Did it make him feel bad? I should, the doctor says. Each response was emotionless and flat. He simply shrugged when asked if he wanted to return home. The judge spent what seemed like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, going over each report. At last, she raised her head and declared her choice. Noah would be sent to the specialized Pinery Ridge Residential Treatment Center, which is 2 hours away. Every week, we would have family therapy and twice-weekly supervised visits. She cautioned us to be ready for a long-term arrangement, even though the placement would be reviewed every 6 months. As I felt nothing but numbness, Sarah began to cry quietly. A week later was moving day. Sarah labeled everything with Noah's name while I packed his toys and clothes into boxes. A list of authorized items had been sent by the facility. No sharp objects, no internet-connected devices, and no longer than 12-inch cords or strings. For the most part, We drove in silence for the 2 hours. Without ever looking out the window, Noah sat in the back and played with a puzzle cube. Pine Ridge resembled a hybrid of a hospital and a school. High fences, keypad-operated locked doors, and cameras everywhere. However, they made an effort to make it less frightening by adding vibrant murals and a playground that could be seen through reinforced windows. Noah had a small but tidy room with a desk with rounded edges, a dresser that couldn't topple over, and a bed that was bolted to the floor. As a staff member watched, I assisted him in organizing his belongings. Noah methodically arranged everything, lining up his books by size and grouping his clothes by color. He looked at the window locks, measured the closet, and tested the mattress. He didn't ask when he could return home or when we would visit when we had to leave. He simply waved before returning to his shelf organization. Before we left, Erica Moore met with us. Having spent 15 years working with children like Noah, she oversaw the behavioral program. She clarified that their system taught proper behavior through explicit rewards and penalties. Points toward privileges were accrued for each wise decision. Points were deducted for each rule infraction. Noah was intelligent enough, she said, to pick up the system fast. Teaching him how to live in society safely was the aim, not curing him. It felt so wrong, yet strangely peaceful, to be without Noah at home for the first week. I kept going by his room in the hopes of seeing him. However, Emily changed almost instantly. She no longer looked behind doors before going into rooms. She began to sleep through the night without experiencing any fear. She requested a second helping of dinner and burst out laughing at cartoons once more. I was unaware that she had been tense until her entire body seemed to relax. Sarah and I didn't discuss how silent the house was. Erica from Pine Ridge called me during dinner 3 days later to inform me that Noah had gotten another child in trouble for bringing candy into their room from the cafeteria. Noah had persuaded the younger boy that breaking the rules together would be an enjoyable game. However, Noah quickly attributed everything to the other child after staff discovered them. Erica claimed that Noah didn't display any remorse or shame when they confronted him about controlling the younger resident. Instead, he appeared upset that his scheme had failed. I could tell she wasn't surprised at all, but she clarified that this was a fairly typical behavior for children with his condition and that they would be working on it in therapy. Sarah informed me the following morning that she needed assistance coping with everything and had scheduled a session with a therapist for herself. That afternoon, she had her first session with a specialist in helping parents of children with behavioral issues. Her eyes were red from crying when she returned, but in some way she appeared more at ease. She claimed the therapist helped her realize that Noah's brain was different from birth and that acknowledging this did not imply she was a bad mother or that she was giving up on him. She could no longer blame herself for not making the necessary repairs to something that couldn't be fixed the way we wanted it to be. Noah and I had our first video family therapy session at the facility 2 days later. Sarah and I were huddled around my laptop at the kitchen table, and he was sitting in a chair next to Erica. Noah used the appropriate words to respond to every question, expressing regret for Emily's pain and understanding of his need to be at Pine Ridge, but there was no emotion in any of it. Even though he didn't feel the responses naturally, Erica later noted that this was progress because he was learning what people expected from him. According to her, for kids like Noah, learning to mimic appropriate emotions was sometimes the best outcome they could hope for. Emily climbed into my lap at bedtime that night and inquired as to Noah's health. Finding language that a 5-year-old could comprehend without becoming even more frightened was difficult for me. After several attempts, we decided to explain to her that Noah needed extra assistance to learn how to be safe around other people because his brain functioned differently. She asked if he would recover, as if she understood this. Although I refrained from making unfulfillable promises, I informed her that the doctors were assisting him in learning. Erica called 3 weeks after Noah's arrival at Pine Ridge to inform him that he had earned his first privilege by continuously abiding by all the rules. Every day, he received an additional half-hour of computer time to play educational games. She claimed that although he appeared happy when they informed him, It was difficult to determine whether he was truly happy or merely acknowledged that he had accomplished a goal he had been pursuing. I became aware of how much we now scrutinize every small response from Noah, searching for indications of typical emotion that most likely weren't present. I was transforming Noah's room into a playroom for Emily that weekend when it really hit me. I remembered supporting him at his games and teaching him how to throw a curveball in the backyard when I came across his Little League trophy from the previous season. I had lost all of the typical dad moments I had anticipated. I wouldn't watch him graduate or dance at his wedding, nor would I teach him to drive. The future I had imagined for my son had vanished entirely, to be replaced by behavior charts and supervised visits. I allowed myself to feel my sorrow for the child I believed I had while I sat on his bed with that trophy. 2 days later, the next facility report stated that Noah was exceeding most residents in earning privileges and adhering to all rules. But in their observations, they found something alarming. He never inquired about returning home or when he could see us again, and he displayed no signs of homesickness. Family visits only piqued his interest because they were necessary to earn certain privileges. While other children wept for their parents or became distressed about being separated from their homes, Noah viewed the facility as a puzzle to be solved rather than as a barrier separating him from his loved ones. A card that Noah had created in art therapy was given to me during our subsequent supervised visit. In his neat handwriting, it read, "I love you, Dad," and featured a drawing of our family. My heart skipped a beat, thinking that perhaps he was beginning to feel something. However, the art therapist later drew me aside to explain that he had been asked to create the card during the session and had replicated the writing on another child's card. He had inquired as to whether creating the card would count toward his next privilege, she said. Emily had a complete safety plan in place when she returned to her regular preschool 3 days later. Her special buddy teacher, who was aware of Noah's predicament, was assigned by Mrs. Carter to keep a closer eye on her. Even though Emily was anxious that first morning, she smiled and talked about playing with her friends once more when she got home. Even though it was painful, everything else seemed worthwhile when she began to act like a typical child again. That evening, Sarah and I sat down to discuss how to pay for Noah's treatment using our investment accounts and bank statements. Pine Ridge was more expensive than most people's monthly mortgage, and insurance paid very little for residential psychiatric treatment. We had to cash out a portion of my 401k early and sell some stocks we had been saving for the kids' college funds, which came with steep penalties. Sarah started crying again because of the financial strain on top of everything else, but there was nothing we could do. 3 days later, I received a call from the Pine Ridge psychiatrist, who informed me that Noah had acknowledged in their session that he still considered harming people on a daily basis. He described these ideas while sitting in her office, as if discussing his breakfast. In order to help with the impulses, she wanted to add a mood stabilizer and increase the dosage of his medication. She described how Noah had drawn images of children being harmed, and when she questioned why he did so, he simply shrugged and said it was what he was thinking about. He initially felt exhausted from the new medication, and, according to the facility, he was sleeping for 12 hours every night while still abiding by all of their regulations during the day. Our first family session was set for 6 weeks in a treatment, during which Emily would participate virtually from home with Sarah while I visited the facility. Sitting opposite me in the therapy room, Noah watched Emily's favorite stuffed animal appear on the laptop screen. As soon as she saw Noah's face on the screen, she ducked behind Sarah. As the therapist attempted to get them to engage, he observed her with the same expressionless expression I had seen so many times before. Noah simply cocked his head as if examining a fascinating insect when Emily whispered to Sarah that he was afraid. After 10 minutes, when Emily began to cry, the therapist stopped the video portion. Using flashcards featuring faces representing various emotions, they began teaching Noah about emotions that week. Erica demonstrated to me how he had committed every card to memory and could instantly name the following: happy, sad, angry, scared, and surprised. However, he simply stretched his mouth into a more eerie expression than one of happiness when she asked him to demonstrate what happiness looked like on his own face. He was essentially learning to mimic what he saw without truly feeling it, she explained, because his brain did not process emotions in the same way. That Thursday night, I attended my first meeting of a support group for fathers who are dealing with children who have significant behavioral issues. 8 other fathers were seated in a circle in the room, and I talked about Noah when it was my turn to speak. Tom, one of the men, nodded and said that his 15-year-old son had spent 8 years in various facilities after attempting to set their house on fire while his sister was inside. Another father described how his 13-year-old was currently in juvenile detention after being caught poisoning pets in the neighborhood. I learned from hearing their stories that this wasn't something that improved with time. The following week, Sarah and I began COOS therapy since we were hardly communicating anymore. The therapist assisted us in realizing that we were both grieving in different ways and that we were holding ourselves responsible for not recognizing Noah's issues earlier. I told Sarah about the guilt I felt for not seeing all the warning signs, and she confessed that she had been having nightmares about Noah returning home and hurting Emily once more. In that office, we sobbed together and held hands for the first time in weeks. The facility approved the letter Noah sent home and forwarded it to us. As usual, his handwriting was neat and flawless, and the letter expresses regret for upsetting Emily and depressing us. It was obviously written with assistance from the therapist, as evidenced by the use of phrases like, "I understand my actions caused harm. Furthermore, I take responsibility for my choices." He wrote, in his own words, "Follow the rules better" at the bottom, where they had asked him what he would do differently the next time. He would abide by the rules, but not that he wouldn't harm his sister. After 2 months of treatment, the facility director called to inform them that Noah had become their model resident and was assisting in teaching newly arrived children the rules. She clarified that he had learned their entire behavior system by heart and could accurately recite each rule and consequence. But she was careful to note that he did this to gain benefits like more computer time and better snacks rather than out of altruism. According to her, he maintained a chart in his room that detailed the precise number of points required for every reward. Emily and Laura were working on a project called a safety book, in which she drew images of everyone who had protected her. She attracted our neighbor, who occasionally watched her, as well as Sarah, Laura, her teacher, and her grandparents. There were no photos of Noah. Additionally, Emily stated that he wasn't safe when Laura politely inquired about him. I knew she was right, even though it broke my heart, and it was fortunate that she recognized that. Noah was getting bored and finishing his regular work too quickly, so the facility's teachers contacted us about moving him to their advanced classroom. They claimed that he had a gifted IQ and had no trouble grasping difficult ideas. The issue was that although he had a perfect intellectual understanding of right and wrong, his brain failed to relate that knowledge to any emotions. He could give a long list of reasons why hitting was wrong, but that didn't make him feel bad about it. In order to discuss long-term planning and what would happen after Noah turned 18, the facility director set up a meeting with us. She brought a thick folder of information about residential programs and supervised group homes for adults with antisocial personality disorder to her office and sat us down. She clarified that Noah would most likely require some form of supervised living arrangement for the rest of his life, given his lack of progress in developing empathy. Her remarks about vocational training, medication management, and how some people with Noah's condition could lead semi-independent lives with adequate structure and supervision struck me like a ton of bricks. I was beginning to come to terms with the fact that this was our current situation, even though no parent wanted to hear this about their 7-year-old child. Noah sat across from me in the bright yellow visiting room the following week during our supervised visit and began inquiring about our home. He wanted to know if the motion sensors covered the entire downstairs hole or just specific rooms, and if we were still using the same alarm code. He inquired as to whether Emily's new room had a lock, and if we had fixed the broken lock on the basement window. Without hesitation, Erica rose from her corner chair and approached us. She asked Noah why he wanted that information and told him those were inappropriate questions. He simply said, "I'm curious about home," with a shrug. His voice had the same flat tone he used for everything, and there was nothing nostalgic or homesick about the way he said it, which made my skin crawl. Erica pulled me aside to talk about implementing new safety procedures for any upcoming home visits after ending the visit early. We held our first large case review meeting 3 months after Noah arrived at the facility. People were crammed into the conference room with tablets and thick folders. Along with Erica, the facility director, Noah's psychiatrist, and a state employee who managed residential placements, Dr. Bennett was present. Reports and observations regarding Noah's development were passed around the table. Noah never missed a dose of his medication, according to the psychiatrist. According to the facility director, he complied with all regulations and had not experienced any behavioral issues in weeks. According to his teacher, he was participating in class appropriately and completing work that was grade level. However, everyone's tone shifted when talking about real emotional development. Despite months of intense therapy, Dr. Dorsey explained, Noah showed no development of genuine empathy. He could list all the negative effects of hurting other people and explain why it was wrong, but there was no real emotion in his words. Erica claimed that by observing other children, Noah had learned to imitate acceptable emotional reactions, but this was merely imitation rather than genuine feeling. Everyone fell silent when the state representative inquired about discharge planning. Noah would require ongoing residential treatment for the foreseeable future and most likely into adulthood, the facility director finally stated. Laura showed me a drawing Emily had done during her therapy session that same week. In front of our house, Sarah, Emily, and I were holding hands as a family. Though he was inside a different building that Emily had marked helping house in her unsteady 5-year-old handwriting. Noah was also included in the photo. According to Laura, this demonstrated that Emily understood boundaries in a healthy way and wasn't keeping Noah away from the family, but rather acknowledging that he needed a safe place to be. According to her, Emily was processing the trauma and growing up with age-appropriate safety awareness. Noah was eligible for an overnight Christmas visit in December after accruing enough points in the facility's behavior system. We received a 12-page document from the facility that included safety procedures and supervision requirements. We set up cameras in the common areas and hallways and locked Emily's door during the 2 weeks we spent getting the house ready. We were required to submit a comprehensive schedule that included Noah's location at all times during his visit, as well as the people who would be watching over him. It felt so wrong to have to keep one child safe from another in our own house, and Sarah sobbed as we put the lock on Emily's door. 2 staff members who would alternate shifts stayed at our house while we picked Noah up from the facility on Christmas Eve. Without a word, Noah climbed in with a small bag and fastened his seatbelt. He answered our questions with 1 or 2 words while staring out the window on the way home. Emily was watching from the living room window when we pulled into the driveway, but she vanished as soon as she saw the car. The visit proceeded precisely as the schedule we had provided. The overnight staff member sat at the table with Noah as he ate breakfast after waking up at 7 o'clock. We all watched as he opened his gifts in the living room, and we all used the same tone and expression to say thank you after each one. After precisely half an hour of playing with his new toys, he inquired about the next planned activity. Emily refused to look directly at Noah and remained pressed against my leg until she eventually came downstairs. He simply kept adhering to the schedule and rules without making an effort to speak to her or approach her. Everyone was acting out their parts, making Christmas dinner feel like a play. Noah went to his room at precisely the appointed time, used his napkin properly, and asked to be excused when he was done eating. There was only obedience, no happiness, warmth, or connection. As we drove back to the facility the following morning, Noah looked at me in the rearview mirror and said that he had more privileges at home when he followed the rules than when he broke them. He stated it in a matter-of-fact manner, as if he were describing a mathematical problem. While I gripped the steering wheel and tried not to show how much those words disturbed me, the employee in the passenger seat wrote something in her notebook. Emily began to change over the course of the following few weeks, which caused my heart to both break and heal. When she was playing with her toys and watching cartoons, she began to laugh once more without constantly checking her back. She actually left my side to play on her first date after making friends at preschool. She stopped flinching when people moved too quickly close to her, and her stomach aches totally went away. Even though it meant our family would never look the way we had envisioned, seeing her blossom back into the content child she once was proved we had made the right decision. We adapted to our new schedule, which included weekly therapy sessions, supervised visits, safety plans, and ongoing documentation. Binders containing incident reports, behavior charts, and treatment plans were stacked on our kitchen counter. Every phone had its emergency number displayed, and Emily and I conducted monthly safety drills. Although our family didn't resemble the one I had imagined when Sarah and I first got married, the fact that Emily was safe and we were finding stability in the structure had to be sufficient. That's about the whole story, all right. I appreciate you spending time with me. When I do these, it's always like catching up with a friend. If you feel like it, return the next time.